If you're not the most excited about what you're doing, then what are you doing?
Let's talk about like new and recent research that you're getting excited about. I love that paper that you showed me.
I was gonna be like, we're gonna selflessly talk about our own
Let's talk
research.
about that. Yeah. Yeah, seriously.
I mean, I am not excited about anyone else's stuff because if you're not the most excited about what you're doing, then what are you doing?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're not, if like I know that it's gonna end up coming off as like a little narcissistic, but like if you're not doing the most interesting thing that you think you can be doing and you're a scientist, then why are you a scientist?
Yeah. So tell me about your research.
Okay, so I'll talk about the neurodivergent white paper, the Stoner Neurotype. So we recently published a white paper that's available on our website, and so anyone can read it. And we've reanalyzed data that's from the federal government from 2022, where we could look at the general population and we could look at people who consume cannabis daily. And when you pull out the daily consumers of cannabis, what you can see is that there's a higher prevalence of psychological stress and of disability that is experienced from that psychological stress. Now, the CDC calls that mental illness, and it's in their paperwork and documentation is that, but we call it neurodivergent, and it's an identification of a new subtype or maybe not new actually. We've been here. Let's scratch that. We're not new. We've been around for like a really long time, but it's a subtype of brain that is divergent, but that benefits from medical cannabis, that experiences higher levels of psychological stress and higher levels of disability. And when you pull us out, and it's a quite high percentage actually of the population. It's still a minority, but according to this data, it's somewhere around 2 to 2.5%.
That's significant.
And it's probably undervalued because it's a federal data set. So people aren't trying to be honest with the federal government in all cases when it comes to this medicine. We're probably closer to like 5 to 10% of the population. And whether or not we've found our way to cannabis and benefited from it, many of us have because of these like chronic, multiply complicated situations that are not met by the current healthcare. So we also have data that is on self-reported neurodivergent cannabis consumers. And an interesting thing here is that there's a very common sort of like pattern of the number of diagnoses that people who are neurodivergent and self-identify as neurodivergent and consume cannabis medically, on average have about 3 different indications. It's not like a cut and dry, oh, I'm an anxious person, I have anxiety, I need to manage that. Oh, I have some childhood trauma. I mean, not that that's ever light, but like, it's a combination of things. It's 3, and major depression, bipolar, ADHD, autism. And there's a huge list too of like other things that are neurological that coexist with this, like migraines, like seizures and epilepsy. And what we found with this data is that the more of these categories you fit, like let's say you fit 4 or 5 categories, it's more likely that you're using cannabis to reduce your prescription use, which makes sense because you possibly are taking prescriptions for more things. So cannabis is helping in a harm reduction way to put less medicine and tax your livers less in that way, and tax your body really less than having combinations of synthetics going on. And then the last thing that was interesting from that, well, there's tons more that are interesting, but the last like big things that are interesting is that there are new therapeutic benefits that have never been documented before that actually a pretty high percentage of people utilize cannabis for. Things like processing and memory and hypersensitivity, like a sensory hypersensitivity. These are things that are talked about in a general sense. And I think a lot of people who use cannabis daily would agree, being like, oh, it totally makes loud environments like bearable and more fun, and things that we could do social wise, or bright lights. And so we're really excited about that because this is data to show that, to prove the existence of that. We've always known that we existed, but we didn't actually have the numbers or the ability to point to anything to say like, yeah, we exist, and like actually you've proved our existence, federal government, so thank you.
That's really powerful. I was, clinically speaking, when I was just reading about how migraine sufferers have an increased chance of being depressed, and an increased chance of having ADHD. And it talked about, this paper had talked about the serotonin and the dopamine levels and the GABA levels, and how cannabinoids can actually temper that, can help you temper that. So you can take 3 different prescription medications, a migraine medicine, antidepressant, an anti-anxiety medication, or you can try a natural medicine like cannabis to offset all three things.
And that's one of the really cool things about cannabis is the endocannabinoid system is acting on so many different receptors, not just those cannabinoid receptors. So instead of having to take multiple pharmaceuticals, one natural product can act on all these different receptors and bring regulation. And a lot of what we're doing with our research, as Miyabe's saying, is, we're really trying to represent the neurodivergent population because we've been around forever, but this word hasn't really been around forever and it hasn't been represented in kind of mainstream talk for a long time. And no matter what you identify under the neurodivergent umbrella, it just means that you're diverging from the norm. And because cannabis has so many different medicinal benefits for people that are diverging from the norm, it can help you kind of find your balance no matter what that condition might be. It can help you bring regulation, and no other pharmaceutical, no other drug. The purpose is to bring homeostasis or balance in your body. It's always a very specific like receptor ligand interaction, not, whatever your condition is, this can help balance it out and find your better baseline.
And then you think about the side effects, dampening emotions, making you feel apathetic, losing your creativity, losing your personality. That's one of the things when I treat pediatric patients, a lot of the parents that are looking for alternatives, they'll say, I tried this prescription medication, but like they weren't the same. My child lost their personality and isn't giggling and free flowing as much as they used to be.
And
And
especially as a
it's sad.
kid,
As a
like
kid.
that's so important to be able to express yourself and like make friends and, just be able to like show joy and emotions because that's going to follow you through the rest of your life.
Cannabis is such a harm reduction in so many ways for these psychiatric medications that I think definitely are life-saving and can help people, but that definitely don't work for a very significant percentage of the population. And I experienced depersonalization, derealization, and I did not have nearly as many severe behaviors or the extent and intensity of the level of behavior that I exhibited when I was on cocktails of psychopharmaceuticals. It's not the same. It's not the same feeling of being like so dissociated from life that you're not certain what's real anymore and you don't care. These molecules coming in and just hitting one target, everything that we do in our bodies is going to have a response to that. And so when we're doing that, we are in sometimes and in some ways offsetting a balance that someone else is very sensitive to. Like I'm very sensitive to serotonergics, it appears, and GABAergics also. Not necessarily sensitive in a bad way, in a way that it could be it's useful, right? Like I love classic serotonergic psychedelics, and I also benefit tons from kava. Kava lactones are GABAergic. It's like an understanding about these different molecules, how these molecules work in our brains and bodies. And for me, the difference between taking a really strong benzodiazepine like Ativan or like Xanny and like just taking one of those and feeling this like really intense singular activation of that receptor is so different than even taking a concentrated kava amount of a natural product that has 9 to 13 to, I'm sure there's more actually, that because there hasn't been as much research on it. And I feel like it's very cool because the research we're doing now is a lot of the research that we've been working together for a long time now, and like things are coming together that we've been talking about for years.
We always manifested it, but it's actually coming together right now, which is awesome. And I think another really cool thing about our research is we are trying to study the plant, the natural product. Like there's a lot of people studying isolated cannabinoids, isolated terpenes, but that's again much more pharmaceutical. And we really want to represent the plant, whether it's kava, whether it's kratom, whether it's cannabis. Like we want to be able to show that complexity. And that is really hard to do in research because no research is done like that, looking at synergies and looking at complexity and almost embracing complexity. But it's something that we know the cannabis community is passionate about. Like people don't want those isolated compounds. They want to use the plant. And going back to like dosing children, dosing yourself, like the beautiful thing about a natural product is it can be dynamic. You can say, okay, I need this dose now, or I'm going to use this strain now because I'm feeling like this. If you're using an SSRI, you're going to be told to take that same dose every day for at least a month, before you can even talk to your doctor again and be like, hey, this is working, this is not, because they're going to tell you it takes 2 weeks for your body to even get used to it. And with cannabis, you're going to feel it, and you're going to be able to titrate and gauge that and say, okay, this strain didn't really work for me for what I'm looking for, but luckily there's hundreds of others available. Or, hey, maybe I should try a different consumption method, and that has different chemistry, and that's going to help me feel differently. So there's this level of autonomy where people can feel that they have control over their medicine, and they can know where it comes from. They can grow it if they want to, and they can use that complex pharmacology to their advantage and not look at it as a disadvantage, as much of pharmaceutical research has looked at it.
And I appreciate that from the level, not just the plant level, but when you think of like disease, right? I mean, you think of the American medical model, it's, you have a disease and then you want to kill it, right? So you have one diagnosis and we're going to just target that diagnosis of anxiety. But when you look at neurodivergence, you look at the beautiful complexity of being neurodivergent. And what does that mean? What does that mean to your digestive system sometimes when you're feeling really amped up or you're feeling really sad? What does that do to those migraine flare-ups or your joints? Are you going to be achier in the morning? Are you not going to have a good night's sleep? So your research and in plant medicine is really teaching us a lesson about ourselves and how we approach healing.
I think it's about this whole, exactly what you said about this like whole approach and what we're talking about with having autonomy over how we feel and what our quality of life is. Neurodivergent people have sensitive brains in some sense. Like usually your brain is sensitive in a number of ways, and it's different than how my brain is sensitive, and it's different than how your brain is sensitive. And these sensitivities will absolutely carry out into other physical processes, like other physical things and aspects of our bodies. And so it's really common for there to be chronic pain. It's really common for there to be like GI issues. There's these overlapping, what people call comorbidities. I remember when I first learned about it, I was like overwhelmed by the number of things that could be wrong. But once I started seeing it as one thing, it actually helped me a lot to understand that it is just one thing. Having a sensitive brain typically means you have sensitivities that are in your body, that exhibit themselves in your body too. And that cannabis being really universal medicine that does in some ways and can dampen pain in a number of ways. It's not the same as an opioid. No one would ever tell you that, right? That the pain management is the same as that. But it has these different mechanisms that it could get at pain. Sometimes it even increases my pain, but it was allowing my body to realize I was in pain, and then that makes me stretch or take care of my body, and then I'm in less pain later. Other times it actually just helps me not feel in pain. I'm just thinking about it less. I'm in less pain. And sometimes if the pain is inflammatory, it'll get rid of the pain entirely because it's a powerful anti-inflammatory. So just for these different types of pain, for the different like uses of it, like to be able to understand that, and people who really know that are people who use the plant as medicine. And we've never been given a seat at the table before to talk about the medical quality of the plant from a scientific perspective, because we've always been studied from the outside looking in, and they don't like what they see.
Especially the data on like consumption. Like the consumption yes. scares people because we consume a lot of cannabis. And I think a lot of researchers who are outside of this space would be like, you take 10 dabs a day, like, oh my gosh, you have a problem, you're an addict, just like absolutely crazy. But like when we're talking within the community, and when we say like, yeah, we consume a lot of cannabis, people feel more open with actually being honest with how much they're consuming. And for the first time through our research, we are getting honest data about specifically the neurodivergent community, how often they're consuming, the doses they're consuming, the consumption methods they're consuming. And that's really powerful to look at those numbers and say, hey, I'm not alone for taking 10 dabs a day. Actually, a lot of people are, if not more. And guess what? They're not having adverse effects. Their quality of life is increased. A lot of things in their life have increased. So it's really about like who's collecting that data, how are we presenting that data? And as Miyabe started this conversation, how are we analyzing that data? Because that's really important for publication. It's very easy to leave out stuff you don't want to put into a publication or to include the things that you do.
And it's interesting when you look at a typical neurodivergent patient, they're on at least 5 different medications, prescription medications, because you have side effects from the medications. Maybe it's weight gain, low libido, insomnia. I mean, it could just, the list goes on. And you end up getting prescribed 4 to 5 prescription medications easily. Why is that okay? Right?
Yeah.
When we think about the perspective, I think that one thing we have to say whenever we talk about our lived experience and our data sets, because again, yeah, like if you're going to get a different answer if you're the federal government coming to talk to someone about their cannabis use in a state that is not pro cannabis, and to someone who doesn't know, these are just federal government workers taking this data, you're going to get a different response than from people know that like the average consumption between us is like high, like equivalents of flower that are higher than like an eighth a day or so. Although when we looked at each other, when we looked at our own data from 2 weeks consumption, there's actually a lot of variability in how much cannabis both of us use. And actually everyone typically has a lot of variability in their cannabis use. So even if you can go through periods of time where you're very consistent, typically people who know and understand their relationship with the cannabis plant eventually end up having very unique and specialized procedures, like even integrating rare cannabinoids like CBG and CBN and definitely CBD. But even more so than that, understanding like, I use a topical for this purpose and I use a topical at this time, like in the mornings is a good time for me, or people who like to take edibles because it has a longer duration of action for sleep, like later in the day. But not in the morning, or people who love to wake up and take it up. And like waking up with a dab is interesting because it's a very useful thing in a lot of situations. And I think that sounds terrible. I feel like it sounds like one of those things that people would never say to do. But if we were to phrase that pharmaceutically, you would just be waking up with a larger than average dose of an immediate onset of a medicine that's very anti-inflammatory. And maybe you woke up that morning in a very inflamed state and about to have a panic attack. These are very unique situations for which it's almost like an EpiPen kind of situation, but dabs and inhalables have those advantages.
Yes, and it's interesting you say that because what we reflect on clinically with patients when they do say, I have to wake up and I use a dab or I need to make sure I use my vape pen. I always say, well, what did that allow you to do? Did that allow you to take that morning walk? Were you able to get on the piano and play a piece? Were you able to get to work on time?
Eat food.
Eat, right? What did that open up for you? Instead of thinking like, this is what I had to do. I took a dab and then you're like, oh my God, like this is such a high dose in the morning, but it allowed me to be productive for the rest of the day.
And it's back to that like dynamic dosing again, because you are able to make that decision with how you feel when you wake up that day. And there was a lot of women that were participating in our research. And we think about how your menstrual cycle changes your pain tolerance, changes your inflammation, changes your emotional regulation, how you feel. And, we do see that it fluctuates quite a bit, consumption, methods of consumption, doses of consumption throughout that 3-4 week period, which is expected because your body is changing throughout that time period. We're not consistent, so our dosing shouldn't really be expected to be consistent either.
And that's what we get a lot. We get panicked like, oh my God, I needed more closer to my period. Does that mean I'm building a tolerance, or what's happening? Why does it keep going up and down? And we always say embrace that because it is a dynamic process, and that actually empowers you to use as little or as much as you want, different days of the week, different times of the month.
Intolerance isn't always a bad thing. We talk about, especially people with
right.
PTSD, and, lowering those levels of cannabinoid receptors in the brain can be really beneficial. But also, if you're really prone to anxiety, if you can build a little bit of a tolerance to THC, you're going to have less of that anxiogenic or anxiety generating response every time you're using THC. So you're going to get more of a medicinal benefit of it if you can start to get your body used to it and your mind used to those effects.
That is such a good point. I haven't heard it put that way.
Riley and I, when we met, I was limiting my THC intake to the minimum threshold that I could handle for my state. And I had been doing it for a few years. I was doing these experimentation on myself of what my therapeutic minimum was, of the smallest amount. And actually, I used to advocate for that, which horrifies me now. But like, I used to advocate for being like, I found out what I needed and now I'm using what I need. And then when we started the nonprofit together, I went on a reverse experiment where I was like, I'm just going to use as much as I want, period, for however long I want, for at least a month, to evaluate what happens. And it did not keep going up. It leveled off at around an eighth of flower a day or something like that, which was far higher than what I had been using for a very long time since. And my anxiety level, I'm a different person in many ways.
And especially when people say, like, I used to consume a ton of THC and like I never got anxiety. I definitely cut back, but now whenever I smoke, I get anxiety. I'm like, well, part of that very well might be your tolerance to THC. Like, you've dropped it significantly. So either, you need to kind of stay at those levels of consumption, or you need to slowly build up your tolerance a little bit. And like, a tolerance is not unique to cannabis.
Right.
If you're on an SSRI
100%.
long enough, they're going to keep increasing that dose too, because it's acting on receptors and the same mechanisms happening, just with a different receptor. And you are going to build tolerance and you're going to need a larger dose. So, it's always demonized in cannabis because it's like, oh, you're consuming too much, but it's not the case. It's just your body getting used to something, and it doesn't always need to be presented in that negative light. Like, it is not always a negative thing.
Yeah, I was going to say it's the same with pharmaceuticals. You switch SSRIs, you switch blood pressure medications, you switch diabetes medications. I mean, you plateau and then let's give you something else, or let's give an additional statin on top of the diabetes med. Let's give this. I mean, you just keep adding it on.
You know how they say when you introduce an SSRI or when you introduce an atypical antipsychotic, they'll usually say, let's wait 2 to 3 weeks of you being at a certain dose for us to see what that actual response is. What they're describing is for you to wait until you develop a tolerance to that dose, so that you can see what the effects of the drug totally are. It's not phrased that way because in the pharmaceutical sciences, it's like a steady state, right?
True.
But the steady state is very desirable, specifically for the pharmaceuticals that are used to treat what they consider chronic illness. But like, from my perspective, it's challenges that have to do with a difference in the way that your brain processes the world around you that are highly inflammatory for the most part. And you get these challenges that are every day for the rest of your life. I don't mean that even in a morbid way, because the beautiful things, as you mentioned before, that come with it, I would never trade out. But it does come with different challenges than that exist in the general population. That is the majority of people who will respond well to psychopharmaceuticals. And that's great that it works for those people. But for other people, the steady state of a natural product is way more beneficial. And we should have every right to consume that and have a relationship with the earth and our medicine anyways, regardless of that it's the same. But it is the same. Regardless of what the personal belief is there about our ownership of our own bodies and the relationship we have with the earth as medicine, there's another piece here, which is that they have the same therapeutic mechanisms of action as these psychopharmaceuticals, and everything that we demonize about it, we embrace. And we're not trying to demonize the psychopharmaceuticals at all, because they help people. But we are just saying that we are trained as pharmaceutical scientists. And from our training and background, yes, we absolutely can apply this to cannabis.
Or in many cases, maybe you can pair that pharmaceutical medicine with natural products and be able to use less of the pharmaceutical medicine and titrate your dose in different ways, and, find a different type of steady state by learning how to utilize both medicines. This data exists with opioids, and it's very convincing with opioids that if you combine cannabis medicine with opioids, you need a significantly lower dose of those opioids, which again is harm reduction, because as we know, the more opioids that are in our body, the more likely that we develop some sort of addiction to it and, a poor relationship. But if we can increase cannabinoid dose, which are much, much less addicting, it's, again, just safer for everybody.
Our research actually shows when we taper off the opiates, we can actually prescribe less prescription medications for the withdrawal symptoms. So instead of clonidine for, your sympathetic system, the blood pressure, instead of baclofen, instead of gabapentin, instead of, ibuprofen, we can use cannabinoids instead to offset those withdrawal symptoms.
Oh, that's huge. So you're not just reducing the amount of opioids, you're reducing the amount of all of these other medicines too, which again, many of them have side effects, which we're also, adding other medicines on to reduce that too. So benefits everyone.
I was on a prescription of ibuprofen. I was on a really high dose for tendonitis and I'm hypermobile and I have a lot of injuries. So I was on this super high dose of ibuprofen when I started my PhD. And it was in my journal club, actually. I was talking to these professors and we were like discussing, I had all these stomach problems. And when they found out I was on this like insanely high dose of ibuprofen, it was like 600 milligrams multiple times a day. They were like, that's horrifying. Like, you should not be taking that much of it. So I actually cut it out completely. And I did go through a period of time where I was in more pain. It was like a few weeks where like I was in a lot of inflammatory joint pain. But now when I take them, actually they work for me and I can take them sometimes when I have increased inflammation in addition to cannabis as a synergy. But when I was taking them as a prescription medication every single day, it was ruining my stomach. And it also was making the drug less efficacious itself because our bodies get used to things. And so this is just it's beautiful to hear that this happens with cannabis, but it's also kind of like infuriating because we don't need more research on how it is a harm reduction within our population. We need to be valued as a population on our own that is different from the general population, because right now it's always a comparison between us and everyone else in this like large umbrella. But like, you can't compare neurodivergent cannabis consumers who are multiply disabled to an average person. We are not average. We're a minority. We're a minority that spans socioeconomic classes, racial classes, and geography, but we are a minority nonetheless. You can't look at us and know necessarily that like that's who we are, but we have our ways of finding each other. That's for sure.
I mean, that's what I'm so grateful for, is the community that we've built over the years, because we are truth seekers. So we don't take no for an answer. I think of just patients that have gone through the revolving door of doctor after doctor, being dismissed, being over medicated, being scapegoated. And thank goodness we come back. For me as a chronic pain survivor, I think like, thank goodness I just didn't take their answer as truth. Like, you know what, that medication is not really working, or I'm not going to have that surgery. That's pretty invasive. If you want to fuse all, my vertebrae, I'm just going to get back to you on that.
I love that, truth seekers, because you're so right. And oftentimes there is a lack of trust in the medical system within our population of people, which is again why it's really important for us to do this research, a bit outside of the medical system. So people can be like, okay, like we trust you guys, but not even just like neurodivergent people not immediately trusting their doctor just blindly because they said something, but even when Miyabe and I are at events and we're speaking on panels and stuff, I mean, we say stuff and people are like, did they just say that? Did they just say that out loud? Like, there's definitely like these looks of shock on people's faces because we are speaking the truth, because we work for ourselves and because we've started to build this, for ourselves and for our community. We can start to break down those barriers and those shackles and things that people are so scared of talking about because they're going to get fired for having an opinion on something. We're able to have an opinion on something, which allows other people to feel safe talking to us after and saying, thank you for bringing this up. I've always felt this way, or, I have this condition and I've never been able to talk to anyone about it, but you guys are just talking about it openly, which is absolutely mind-blowing to me. Like, again, in front of like hundreds of people in panels and professional settings with other medical professionals, we're able to talk about these incredibly stigmatized topics, which leads to deeper and more useful conversations than we've ever seen before.
And I think your paper is going to have that same impact.
Yeah, and we hope that it allows and opens the door for people to value our community as the knowledge and truth seekers that we are with our lived experience, and also value the lived experience of individuals just in general. There's a saying within the autistic community that's really like, it's a common saying, which is that when you meet one autistic person, you're just meeting one person. And that you could say that about hypermobility and Ehlers-Danlos. You could say that about ADHD. You could say that about chronic pain. Is it fibromyalgia? You could say that about, is it joint pain? Is it rheumatoid? Some sort of like inflammatory. And what we want to embrace with our research is how can we empower individuals to advocate for themselves as well, because the ripple effects become the largest once we actually feel like we have the knowledge that we can say this, because we're not saying this about everyone too. Like, I think that, I want to get out ahead of the people being like, okay, you're advocating for terrible things and setting a terrible example. It's like, okay, calm down. Our opinions are not just opinions. This isn't just Dr. Riley Kirk and myself getting around in smoke session once and being like, listen to this radical opinion we got here. I mean, we do that.
That happens, but but less publicly usually.
Less publicly, not all the time, even sometimes on the podcast, it's just going. But a vast majority of our opinions that we put out there into the universe are things that are a combination of years and years of research that we have done at atomic scale, molecular level biochemistry, combined with the information that we've been collecting from the community over the last years and the relationships that we've built within different sectors of our community. Because the cannabis community itself is very, very diasporic in its own way, in so many different ways, and separated and segregated. And the industry itself is separated and segregated, not just medical and adult use, but like all the other specialties and ancillaries, et cetera.
They're data-backed opinions.
They're data-driven opinions. And so this also has happened so many times I can't count since we started working together. But, one of us will say something and be like, oh, is that too radical? Like, should we have retracted that? And the response is always like, no, that's just logical and the truth. And I think we're ready now. People are ready to understand that their truth that they have been experiencing is as valuable as the truth that other people say that it should be. Because someone can tell me what they think about my life all they want, but they could also not do that. Or they could do it. It's going to be a waste of their breath. I don't think that very many people are going to be able to tell me anything about what is happening within my own brain at this point. And I wish that I had known that before. I think other people we're hoping are going to be able to understand that, and then also, optimize quality of life, because ultimately that is what we want to use our data for, is for people to increase their quality of life the same way that we're able to. And by having the knowledge that we've had with the plant, with the community, go back and actually have our community be able to understand and advocate for ourselves better, and having higher quality medicine and higher qualities of life.
And also empowering the next generation of scientists, which, we're always taught, specifically in academia, that you have to live by these super linear, instructions and life rules. You do your undergrad, your grad, your postdoc, and then maybe eventually you can become a professor for the rest of your life. And it's like, no thanks. There's no type of actual lived experience integrated into that to make your own opinions, contribute to that literature. So, both of us get so many messages that say thank you for what you do. You've really inspired me to go back to school and get a degree in X, Y, or Z, whatever it is. It's not necessarily molecular biology. It's a whole spectrum of things, but having people that are passionate about cannabis, about healing, about this type of, message that we have in all of these different sectors of science, that's really how you make change, is start to build up the next generation and get people empowered to want to do research that's not just meaningful, but also representative of the actual humans that we're doing research for.
Yes. Wow. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I know we're coming up on time, but when does your research come out, and how will we find it?
So the white paper is on the website right now. And I think that, actually, I'll send it to you so you can just link it.
So make sure we'll link it. Yeah.
Here. We'll have a video recording. We're going to do a podcast ourselves at some point too. I've been running discussion groups. Okay. So we experience a lot of financial discrimination and censorship.
Okay.
So for example, right now, someone asked me how they can buy this shirt. And I wanted to tag our nonprofit and say, go there and buy it. But my account will not let me respond to the comments and tag the nonprofit. Now, I can respond to comments and tag no one, but I can't I can't tell them where to get this shirt. Which is, it's going to make me $5. I'll probably send them a direct message. But I'm still going to do it. I want people to wear this shirt. We want people to rep Stoner Scientists. It's participate in the research and be part of our team. All this to say is that I've been running these neurodivergent, the course, the Neurodivergent Brain on Drugs, on Applied Pharmacognosy, is a virtually downloaded course. And I've been running discussions in person. But the mechanism that I was using to let people register for discussions and then give a donation if they want to the nonprofit, we have lost the ability to process payments on that software.
And that was our main way that we funded our nonprofit, was through community donations. And yeah, when we lost the ability to take money from anyone, it's like that significantly impacted us. And it was almost a year that we weren't able to like take money from people, which is,
well, we still haven't found a solution. So
well, it's back up for now, but like it's not long. Like there's no longevity there. Like once we get hit with something, it might get restored a few months later. Then we get hit with another thing, and then it's like the amount of money we have to pay just to jump through these hoops to be able to do something. It's just, you understand like why so many people struggle in this space. It's the system was not meant to support these types of causes. It's like there's so many barriers in place to prevent people from doing exactly what we're doing, but we're still going to do it, and we're still going to persist, and we're going to find a way. It's not going to be easy, but our community wants to support us, and we're so thankful for everybody who already has. But man, I don't think anybody knows the struggles on the back end. And it's really just Miyabe and I doing almost everything too. It's just like our time is like we're doing the research, we're dealing with all this payment stuff, we're doing all of our website, our newsletter, our blog. So it's definitely been a struggle.
True entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs.
But the part of it that's very frustrating is that these discussion courses were free and then just had the optional donation. So we will be running the discussions again once we're able to like take donations. We're verifying that we can, and I'm about to spend an hour in a meeting discussing how we're able to use language around it. And it's not just the money that we lost, because we had over 10K in flux that they refused to process for us that we actually were able to get back, but there was a whole thing that's going on, but they didn't even tell us they weren't going to process it, and then just held it and didn't process it. Also, we are not plant touching. So most of the cannabis companies and we're a nonprofit, right there in the name, we're not profitable. And, most of these companies that are experiencing these levels of discrimination have profitability of a product, at least, that they're relying upon. And for us, we actually were funded much more by the community than we were by the industry last year. So thank you, community, also. And it's incredible, but it's not just the money. It's not just the fact that this money is happening. It's the opportunity cost, because it's the time spent. And also it's unique to us because we do public education and harm reduction on what is our fields of expertise as PhD scientists. And that component is unique because we don't have a product and we don't have a plant touching situation. So like that component of it, but the discrimination is not unique in the industry.
Right.
Oh,
right.
Not at all. And I will say too, so the neurodivergent white paper is available now, but we're also working on getting ready to publish our longitudinal data set, which also has a lot of information about neurodivergent people and the way that, we react to certain things that we dose. So we're getting ready to write that up for a peer-reviewed publication. We're hoping to submit that within probably the next month to month and a half. So I think, as long as that goes smoothly, that'll go through peer review, and then, that can take a little while, but that will be, within the next foreseeable future, we'll be able to get that out as well.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for today. I always enjoy speaking with you guys.
One more thing was that if people do want to stay in touch about future studies that we have that are very relevant to neurodivergent cannabis consumption, the best way is to sign up for our email newsletter, because direct communication between us is like the way that we could actually also say anything that we want to say when we're publicly communicating. But we do also announce all of the opportunities for like research partnerships, not just for ourselves, but for other people too in the space. We like to amplify all research. And so if you're interested in that and wanting to stay in touch with us, on our website, our email newsletter sign up is the best way to support us. Also, is to send people there and have them sign up.
Perfect. Thank you.